So I decided to build the app when I realized that 10 or 20 days before that moment, I had bought an iPhone just to use demos. Rebuilding something like Twitter feels like a huge undertaking for just one person to do it by itself. But frankly, it wasn't. All the information is public. You cannot, your model, your business model cannot be bound by you having access to that information, right? Because everybody would also have access. So your business model has to be on specifically on the additional services you provide on top of that information. So the lines between competition and collaboration are extremely blurred on Nostr because you have to, if people are using a given message type, you have to support it. The model that I think matters the most is some type of Substack-like interface where creators get paid for the content they make, not in any given platform, but for the protocol itself. So through Zaps that any app can actually integrate with.
Vitor Pamplona is the lead developer at Amethyst, the most popular Nostr client for Android with over 50,000 downloads in its first month. In our conversation, we explored Vitor's path to building Amethyst. We talked about collaboration, competition, and centralization on Nostr. And then we explored potential business models for Amethyst and for Nostr companies. If you enjoyed this episode and you learned something new, the best way that you can show your support is by sending in sats over the Lightning Network. You can use any podcasting 2.0 app. There are dozens of them out there, but my favorite one to use is Fountain. Before we get into today's show, just a quick message from our sponsors. Today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Stackwork. And Stackwork is a Lightning-powered transcription tool that takes the best of AIs and humans to create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. We'll have more from Voltage and Stackwork later in the show. Vitor, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to talk about all that you're building with Amethyst. And there's been a bit of a theme of Nostr-related discussion on this show in the last little while. It seems to be all that anyone can talk about. So I have a lot of questions for you. But before we get into it, why don't we give listeners a little bit of a background on yourself? How did you first discover Bitcoin? How did you first discover Nostr? And why did you decide to build Amethyst?
Nice. Thanks for having me, Kevin. This is great. Love the opportunity to explain more of what we are doing and more about Nostr itself. I'm a computer scientist by background. I did my PhD at an MIT lab on a medical device, actually. So I'm coming from that heavy healthcare background. We built a company around it. We shipped for the past 10 years or so a little medical device that helps you get your prescription for glasses through a VR device, a virtual reality device. And since the pandemic, I have been very deep into this verifiable credential ecosystem. Initially with this COVID QR codes. We did the Gen 0 of the COVID QR codes, which is essentially a Nostr, but flowing information through a QR code instead of a relay. And then now, more recently, with Nostr, trying to develop Amethyst, which is just this super new 1-month-old app for Android that is a Twitter-like interface with some chatting capabilities for public chats and private messages. So it aligns really well to what we have been doing in the past, which is just trying to provide information to people in the best way we can.
Was there a particular moment when you knew Nostr was something interesting to focus on? Like, where in this last 6 or 8 months did you go, oh, I have to be building on Nostr?
Yeah, so I saw Nostr coming up maybe 2 years ago. I think that's when Fiat Jeff created it. And I dismissed it right away because it wasn't really the thing that I was focusing at the time. And coming from an angle of an existing verifiable credential ecosystem, the thing you care the most is account management, is just the identity of the person. And Nostr kind of dismissed that to the second layer. So applications will need to figure that out by themselves. And that essentially meant that it wasn't baked in the system for me at the time, and I just dismissed it. And recently, I think it was December last year, when I took a second look at it, I was like, well, identity doesn't need to be in the first layer. And I think that is where the light bulb went up for me. It's like, man, I have been doing this for a while. I know what identity and what the account management um, systems are trying to do when they are baked into the protocol. If they're not baked in, then there are more freedom to just create different ways, different user experiences in the ecosystem, and let the protocol just transfer information. Nostr is essentially an information exchange protocol. Think about an email protocol, but in 2023, right? So messages are encrypted, you can't change it, relays can't do anything about them. They can delete them, but they cannot change it, they cannot create them in your behalf. So this makes it an extreme interesting system to just transfer any type of information. And the way Nostr was designed, the type of messages it carries on forward, allows applications like Amethyst to just develop our own little kinds of events and provide additional services that maybe other folks don't want to serve or don't need to serve in their own applications. So it allows for whoever is developing apps there to just be very creative and think about their own ways to develop a messaging system that goes back and forth. So if you want to do medical data, if you want to do social networking, or if you want to do an internal message system for your teams or your companies, you can all use Nostr because it's all the same platform. It's just different user interfaces, different event types in the protocol itself, but it would just work. Relays wouldn't know the difference between them, or they do know, but they will transfer the information in the same way they would do if it is just a public, social network type of application there.
That's interesting. I actually had no idea Nostr has been in the works for 2 years. I just learned about it in the summer, and I thought I was early because it didn't really catch on until it looks like December of 2022. But I want to touch on the point you made about verifiable credentials and identity. Is the stuff you're working on with verifiable credentials, is that kind of like what DIDs are
Right.
in the TBD ecosystem? Is that the same
Yeah.
idea?
So DIDs are one of the ways you can design a system to control your public keys. So think about, you have as a user over your lifetime, you might control several different identifiers, right? You have your government IDs, you have your public keys for Nostr, and they all kind of are part of the bundle that defines you as a human being through life. And you can rotate them, you can change them, you can activate, deactivate them, and so on. So when you do an account management or an identity management solution, all you're thinking about is how do you get from one key to the next, right? So if you're using Nostr today, if you have realized everything is bound to one key, and if you kind of lose that key or if it leaks, you have to figure out a way to move your posts to a new key external to the protocol. The protocol won't help you with that. So it's about client applications developing systems that are either a backup solution or a information transfer solution to a new pair of keys that you can say that those new keys are now safe. So when you're doing DIDs, and there are equivalent systems that could do a similar job in a centralizing fashion, but the idea is the first one that is purely decentralized. You are just trying to manage that information. Who controls the public key, and how do I verify if that public key is still active for a given user? Which for Nostr doesn't really care. It's like the protocol will just pass it forward if it validates that the content of the message has been signed by that public key. It doesn't say that public key is still being authorized by the user to sign it, right? So you could have something that we have been discussing for quite some time in Nostr is this idea of if the key leaks, because you can post both in the past and in the future, you could have the attacker fiddling with your information of the past to create an attack in the future, right? So if relays take that information as still being, the same author that had the key before, you can see where the problem can start to become difficult to render. So usually in the DID ecosystem, you have a way to say, you know what, I'm not using that key anymore, and you should disqualify all my posts from the past that are using that public key. Um, in Nostr, we have something very early, which is this NIPO 5, which is this verification process in the Nostr ecosystem that's super common right now. That is one of the ways to add additional information to the protocol to understand if you're still in full control over those keys. But of course, that is just a very basic solution. I expect that the whole ecosystem on account management to evolve significantly from there, and just allow not only right now the solution for NIPO 5 is you have a server and you put a JSON on that server with your public keys in it. And as soon as you remove that file from there, essentially you are deauthorizing other clients from thinking that that public key is still you, right? The public key is still there. They will still be able to verify, but in order to present the information to their users, they can check if you're still being in control of that key. And that is part of the ecosystem that is now to clients to develop and to enhance it as much as possible to just bring additional security to everything that is being transmitted over the protocol.
I see. Now, do you think we'll get to a point where these different identity systems, whether it's DIDs, whether it's Nostr identity, whether it is slash tags, will these kind of work together, or will they kind of merge in any way, or is it kind of just competition to figure out which one's everyone going to adopt, and we kind of stick with one and let the others die off?
Well, the hope is that they merge because there are systems already available in each one of these sub ecosystems using different IDs or DID style account management solutions. Um, and hopefully the idea is, at some point we figure out a way to work with everybody together. But if not, I mean, Nostr is just that, right? It's just a new protocol created out of nowhere to fully replace what everybody else was doing with a new version of a social network type of protocol. Um, and it's working really well. So it something like this can happen again for identity, where somebody creates an identity protocol that will work well with Nostr, and everybody else then migrates to that protocol. It's just if we can make it so that we can merge with other folks and see if we can integrate systems around, it will be a softer approach than just recreating everything from scratch. And it's
Yeah,
not that
that
they are
makes sense.
bad. They're just like some of the systems are very centralizing, some others are too decentralized, and some others are just too complicated. So in order to code a DID system, for instance, you do have to have some infrastructure behind it to control all the files and all the authorizations and revocations you can do with that in the first place. But if the ecosystem is already out there and somebody is already doing that for clients like us, Amethyst would be a client to that system, then it's a much easier job, right? We just integrate and let's see how they go from there.
Yeah. It seems like in the last month, Noster's growth and the number of users now on it and the enthusiasm around it has just taken every other, decentralized system by surprise. And it's like leapfrogged everything. Like when we talk about DIDs and slash tags and some of these projects that have been worked on for a while, I don't think any of them have gotten the enthusiasm that Nostr has yet. And as you mentioned, there's trade offs with either approach, and I'm not the one to say which is the correct approach or which is not. But I just find it very interesting that we now have so much momentum behind Nostr that I wonder if that momentum can sway or will sway people to kind of like stick with whatever Nostr decides as the right identity solution, even if it doesn't look like the best one on paper. As long as there's momentum behind it, I wonder if that can compensate for a lack of detail or rigor or whatever in the actual implementation.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and neither am I. Like, I'm not there to say which solution is best. From a client perspective, a client application, we want to make sure users have the best experience we can provide, right? So whatever works, we're going to code. And if it happens to be DIG, great. If it happens to be something else, great. If it happens to just be Nostr as the source of identity, that feels hard to imagine right now, but it could happen. So great, right? And like you said, Momentus is everything. Like over the past 10 years, this whole identity community has been developed solutions for their own verifiable credentials in several different, evolving ways. But there is one thing that they could never crack, which is how to make this whole ecosystem interoperable from the start. If you go into the system, you would see, or the ecosystem, you would see that you have groups of apps that can talk to each other and other apps that don't, even though all of them are creating the same type of verifiable credential as initially defined. So you see how broken it is because the protocol is just too hard to enforce or too hard to completely comply with. And frankly, that is one of the reasons FIATF created this in the first place. It was just too much to start. And when you design something that is as simple as Nostr, and people can build in the ways that we are building right now, momentum is everything. So if we can design as many apps as we can design, this will be a better system, and better systems tend to stick around. It's as simple as that, right? If users like it, they're going to keep using it, and other people are going to be forced to integrate with Nostr somehow. And they might not like it,
Interesting.
right? They might fight against it, but in the end, we all know the better system wins. So it might take 10 years, it might take 20 years, or it might take 1 year in Nostr. 1 year in Nostr is like a decade in any other thing. But it's the better system will win.
Right. I want to step back and talk about Amethyst and kind of rewind the last month, because right now I just looked on the Google Play Store and it just lists, I think, really rough metrics. It listed more than 50,000 downloads of Amethyst. I don't know if that number is accurate today or not, but I want to step back to day one and talk about how you first got this off the ground. What was your strategy when you first decided I'm going to build Amethyst? Day one, how do you get users? How do you decide what to work on, what to build, what not to build? I'd love to hear your kind of backstory there.
So I decided to build the app when I realized that 10 or 20 days before that moment, I had bought an iPhone just to use demos. So I was
Mm,
like that was the only app in that phone that I was using. And the only purpose to buy the phone was to be able to interact with the ecosystem. And I'm an extremely practical person, so if I have to buy a phone to use interact with people, I will do it. But then it quickly hit me that, maybe we should just build an app that works on the phones I'm using, which is Android. And we started thinking on actually building one. And when you start, a new project like this, you're always scared of the size, right? Rebuilding something like Twitter feels like a huge undertaking for just one person to do it by itself. But frankly, it wasn't. And the interesting part that I learned for the past week or so, it's on how much easier it is to build an app today than what it was like 10 years ago. I'm an Android developer for 12 years now. I started in Android 1.5. Um, so at the time, back then, one app like this will take 2 years to be developed. These days, components are there. You can just reuse what other people have been doing. Google has excellent tools, so it's very easy to just kickstart. And we were able to we started on January 5, and we shipped the app, the first version, on the 10th of that month. That version already had a full Twitter interface, full, likability, reply, and retweet. So it was a functional Twitter clone. Um, and from that forward, we started adding more features. So public chats and messages came in later. Notifications with or group notifications where you just not just the post one after the another, which is a very annoying way to do notifications, came after that. And more recently, auto translations, Zaps, and everything else that we are building into. All of them in a span of 45 days or so since January 5 to today. Um, when the app hit the Play Store, then we went from maybe 1,000 users downloading the APK file and side loading to their phones to up to 30,000 and then 50,000 users almost immediately on day one. Um, Together with Demos, by the way. When Demos hit the store, we were already there as well. So it kind of both apps, you know, um, gave each other space to grow because, of course, if you are the your phone choice is not really a choice, right? You either have an iPhone or you have an Android phone. You can't swap back and forth. So if you we were mentioning before, we were talking before of competition. Like, I don't see demos as a competition as much as I see as a collaboration, because I know that whoever has an iPhone today will have an iPhone tomorrow, and whoever has an Android phone today will have an Android phone tomorrow. So they compete, but they also don't compete. They more like collaborate to just try to bring the best experience. And since most of the protocol, remember, Nostr is just a way to transmit messages back and forth. Client apps actually need to make sense of the information that is going back and forth to the user. So it's up to, say, in this case, Will and I, to develop similar features that users can find each other in their own ecosystems, and kind of see the same information, because otherwise it just could be confusion across the board. So that's how, more or less, how we see it.
That's really interesting. And it's just really impressive to think about how quickly you've gone from like 0 users to like tens of thousands. And that's something that I think still today it can be years. Some app developers never even get to that stage, right? It like the fact that you guys have been able to do that in the span of days or weeks, or depending on which Nostr app we're talking about, is like uh, that's really impressive. And I want to hear more about some of the challenges that have come along with that rocket ship growth. Like, surely you must have woken up one day and gone like, "Oh my god, this is like really, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be." Right? Like I think it shocked everyone to see how quickly Nostr has developed. What are some of the challenges that you faced in the meantime, trying to keep the app working and scale and accommodate all the needs of these new users?
So the rocket ship is real, right? And it happens mostly because of the server side infrastructure that is out there. So because Nostr is out there, because relays were out there, because Deimos was out there at the time that we started, Astro Ninja was the main UI for Nostr for web. So like, you already had that user base. You already had people talking, you had people collaborating and sharing their information in the platform. All I needed to do was to enable another group of users to come into the ecosystem, which is the Android users, which at the time we didn't really have a good app for it. Um, and because that was everything was just ready for it. It amplifies the rocket ship behavior. And hopefully everybody else can also see, all the relays and all the other apps out there can also see that we also helped bring their rocket ship into a higher pace, because we're bringing more Android users. And that is the benefit to working with like one open platform like Nostr is. We didn't If you want to make an app, just make an app. You don't need to ask Twitter for their information. You don't need to be bound by any particular rules of another player in the game. If you don't like a relay, you can always go to another relay. You can always put the relay yourself. So for app developers that just want to create their own interfaces for what they imagine is the best user experience for the users, this is just perfect because you have the ecosystem. Everybody is there or still there, and you can just piggyback into that that growth. So I certainly recommend. So if you're building, like if I had to build a full Twitter company, like it would take forever to get the network effects that Nostr is kind of providing everybody for free, right? Like we're never going to get 50,000 users if we had our own servers, our own app. Then we had to code an iOS app, then we had to code a web app, and make sure everything works well with one set of servers that we control. And now we have to think about how to distribute those servers worldwide and so on. None of those things needed to happen for the development of Amethyst. It was already there. So I certainly recommend other builders to just, which I do think will happen now more than ever, is we are going to start seeing um, um, applications that are outside the social media um, scope, such as the one I'm trying to build now, which is a medical device or a medical information app using Nostr as a backbone. So, transmitting social information is usually public, so you don't really need to concern too much about privacy there. But once you add a medical information app, now privacy is key, right? So now, like you have, how do you use the system in the ways that it would allow for that private information, that sensitive information to be out there, and without breaking the system, of course, and without but reusing the same user accounts that you have, the same information that you have, the same types of structures of messages. So how cool would it be if you and your doctor were in the same relay, and you could communicate directly with your doctor through private messages? The doctor could send prescriptions through a relay and back to the phone that you could see. You could reply, you could like, you could open it up, you can share it with other folks. Until that point, was just private. You can allow other people to come in and see your medical records. Going back to the discussion about the COVID QR codes, healthcare right now is fully centralized, either in the US in terms of companies owning all of our data. We don't know how many times they transfer our data um, behind our backs. Um, or it's in some countries like Brazil, India, and Canada, it's owned by the government, right? So you have either a centralizing power in the public entity or in the private entity, but in the end, in both cases, um, there is no way the user knows what's happening from that system. If you bring that into Nostr, now suddenly all your medical information could be in relays, and the user can share it to other relays or can encrypt it different ways, can take it away and provide that data to say another startup that is processing medical information to come up with interesting information to users. Why not? You don't need to ask that permission again to the hospital system, say, to download your entire medical record from their servers and just send it to somebody else. And this is what Nostr allows. It kind of breaks the centralizing power of those private servers out there. Let's hope that from now on, because we have the system, because we have all the apps already available and more coming, there will be very different applications using the same protocol being built upon. So, applications like Amethyst can also piggyback on them and kind of help each other grow and hopefully decentralize sub ecosystems that already are too controlling for their own good.
That's really interesting. I get the idea of you guys helping each other out and kind of piggybacking off each other to bootstrap your own app and to get your initial user base. You really could just like pull from other apps that were already built on Nostr, and you're all kind of sharing the same users. Now I want to ask about the flip side of this though, which is it harder then to keep those users? If you are, if you're building Twitter, it may be harder to acquire users at the beginning, but once you've got them, they're kind of locked in. They can't really go anywhere. Twitter is the, centralizing force that keeps them all together, and they have a network effect. But on Nostr, it may be very easy to generate these users is it going to be harder to keep them and to make sure that they don't migrate to all the other, tens of clients that could be built to accomplish their same goal?
Yeah, for sure. You have a more user-friendly competition between, software providers, either companies or open source code. You will have apps like Amethyst, for instance. We are in that. We have competitors now on Android that they're trying to take the first spot, that we think we are the best application for Android right now, and they're not going to just sit around and not do anything. They will definitely try to overtake us, which is great for consumers, right? Which is great for app users. For people that are building companies within the ecosystem that need some type of profitable model to make it work, what I would say is all the information is public. You cannot, your model, your business model cannot be bound by you having access to that information, right? Because everybody would also have access. So your business model has to be on specifically on the additional services you provide on top of that information. And if that delta of that additional service is worth having, people will be willing to pay for it. But that is where you should concentrate if you have a company in Nostr, either as a relay or as an app. So for instance, if you are a relay, filtering spam right now is a big thing. You have to just figure out a way to keep very innovative spammers out of your real users accounts, and you can do that through a relay. You can do this in many different ways, and hopefully we can have a few companies out there that can survive by providing additional services and charging for them to just keep users safe. uh, I'm always thinking about medical data. So for medical data, it's a very clear use case that you don't want anybody else, inserting data or thinking through the data too much in there. You don't want, so if you have an encrypted payload out there with your prescription for something, you don't really want, other companies trying to hammer that key until you figure out, the actual information behind that payload. So there are ways to do it in ways that it just protects the information more. And that is the space for a company with a regular business model to try to stand alone in this ecosystem. But of course, as soon as you are out there, others will have access to the same information, and they will try to beat competing applications for it, and let the best win.
Yeah. You mentioned potentially having users pay or charging users. Is this something you think is going to be realistic for all users? Basically, everyone using Nostr will have to pay someone somewhere. And the second part of the question is, does that happen on Lightning?
Yeah, so it will definitely happen on Lightning. I don't see anything else. I have my period through the shitcoinery as well. It's there is nothing else that can compete with Lightning at this time, at least not in the amounts we are seeing on Zaps, and how fast they move. Is it a requirement to have a paying service? No. I mean, I think open source applications like ourselves, like other folks, will create a base layer of a given user experience that is expected from a system as we move forward, and that user experience will be increasing, and it will be always free, right? But there will be companies on top of them that hopefully are doing things better than the free tools that then can charge additional services from it. But just from a pure, human perspective, you will need things that you might want to have. So you might want to have, even a fully open protocol that you can download all the data. You might want to have like a company that is just checking people's backgrounds to know if you're talking to the right people you think you are. You might want to have that additional security that you will be willing to pay for. You might want to have, an information storage company that just downloads all your messages and keeps it safe, and so that you don't lose everything overnight because you're using just public relays. And as you probably know, public relays can delete your information at any time. So having a backup solution is probably something that will show up in the future as a paying service. And like that, so there are services that go on top of the protocol that I can see growing over time in terms of the amount of them, but also the revenue models that can happen around.
So it's kind of like your backup example. Maybe that's similar to what people already do today. At least I'm on the iOS ecosystem. We have Apple iCloud backup, right? Like
Right.
everyone pays, not everyone, but I think it's fairly common for people to pay. I think they have a tier of like 99 cents or $3 or $10 or whatever the tiers are. They pay for the ability to back up their photos and make sure they don't lose them. So you figure there could be services like that layered onto Nostr, and people will be willing to pay for those as their data becomes more important on Nostr.
Right. And together with that, you're gonna see identity solutions like we were discussing before. You're gonna I'm sure you're gonna see other coins integrated at some point in the future, other blockchains and so on. But those are always going to be a client app decision to integrate or not. So it might work for some people, and they might create like a subculture within Nostr. And frankly, I think if they do, so be it. Right? If they win, they win. But it's healthy to have that competition to just keep everybody on check to make sure we are going to the right way in the best way we can.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage empowers engineers to integrate Bitcoin and Lightning Network payments into their business stack with an enterprise-grade experience. The team at Voltage is building the complete toolset so that you can do more than simply spin up nodes, but also understand and interpret your node's data. Their new product, Surge, gives engineers the capability to quickly solve problems and optimize operations. With node insights and visibility through time series data, you get dynamic and complex insights never available before. You can get complete control with insanely fast onboarding, advanced client-side encryption, and zero management infrastructure, making backups, networking, and upgrades simple. Get a free 7-day trial today at voltage.cloud.
Do you see a world where people where clients take a cut of the zaps that are going through Nostr? Is that even possible? I know people are zapping each other now pretty frequently, and I imagine that there's a model to be built that kind of resembles a Stripe model, where you're taking 2.9% of every transaction. Well, what if someone comes in and says, I'm going to take 2.9% of every zap, or maybe not 2.9%, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I mean, you could build an app could definitely build that by simply having, say, a Lightning wallet inside the application. So it's as a fully integrated wallet, and because you have a wallet, then you can control which node you access, and the node itself can then charge that additional amount. So it is possible. Let's hope when it happens that they also provide additional services, so it's a better experience than using it for free. Otherwise, they are not going to survive as well, right? So that's the thing. It's in many of the services, because there's so much open source happening right now. It's a race to the bottom. So you either keep yourself improving in the way you charge folks, or you're just gonna fade fade away from existence, and the open source apps will take over. Um, I think most people that are building on Nostr in a for-profit model have that in mind. They know that that's the case, and I think they're doing a great job on keeping themselves in check for those additional services. But frankly, it's if they have to die, they die. I have a company myself as well. The companies are made for that, right? You either make a product that works or it dies, and founders and everybody else are protected from the fact that the company is dying. Um, but so it happens. But let's hope they can actually keep up and just provide more interesting services around. So, for instance, a good one would be we are talking a lot about ChatGPT these days. The integration with those types of AI systems is a client app prerogative. So you can design an app that is just better on helping you write posts, better on helping you figure out what's going on in a given thread. Like say you have a very long Twitter thread, you have tons of notifications coming in, you don't have the time to go through every little detail that's going on. Just let something like ChatGPT give you a summary of what happened over the past 2 hours that you have been away. And that can actually be a service. It's just a time-saving, feature that people would love to have. And at least today, that, in my mind, would be a for-profit pitch. It's just like, okay, if you pay us, you can give you like this additional information in ways that would just save you time.
I like that idea. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting collaboration between, you have AI, you have Nostr, and you have Lightning. Seems like these are new or relatively new primitives that people can now play with and combine in different ways.
And design specific messages that would facilitate the user interface for that new model. I think Will mentioned yesterday, Will Casarin, the developer for Demos, the idea of making a post that if you pay enough, it becomes visible to you, right? So it's a substack in the same interface we have today for Twitter. You could design a very specific type of Nostr event that would just enable that from happening. You already have Zaps, so you piggyback on that the transaction that is happening, and if it goes over a certain amount, say the client app from the author will send the viewer a little password that decrypts the message, and then you can see what's behind it. So you could do that in very interesting ways. You can do just with a 2 or 3 paragraph that is public, and then the rest is private, just like Substack is. Or so you can really think through several of these little models and just try to build new experiences with the same ecosystem that everybody else will be, say, all the relays will be sending messages through, and all client apps will try to read. So if your idea of making that model works and picks up momentum, apps like us, we were just going to have or be forced to implement a way to display that information and to integrate with the paying system you have, right? So if people want to use it, we are going to do it. And so there are so many little ideas that you can have to just enhance the experience while reusing the infrastructure that is out there for Nostr, without breaking anything. Like if you create a new type of event, it's not going to break Amethyst, at least not in the beginning. But if we decide to integrate, now you have more users to see the information you're trying to provide.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the addressable market for Nostr is? Because we've talked about Twitter, I think, is the easiest thing for people to grasp, and they say, it's a Twitter competitor. It's not really, but that's the easiest comparable. Then we've talked about medical messages and medical information. We've talked about Substack. I know Jack Dorsey has a bounty out for GitHub, a GitHub replacement, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that can now be bundled into Nostr. How do you think about what that addressable market looks like? Like what could the GDP of Nostr be over time?
So the funny thing is, Nostr is a protocol that was idealized with the Twitter data structure in mind. So you have, these messages, you have the tags, you have, replies, both, like that's all part of the core of Nostr is there. And what we are doing is essentially porting another data structure into that mindset and kind of shipping through Nostr, which is just bizarre because it's not the way you build systems, right? But because the network effects are so strong, that becomes a very exciting thing to do just because you're going to have free users on day one. With that in mind, what's the total amount of people that can come into? Well, 8 billion people, whatever we have in the planet at the time, because there are ways to design applications that I can't imagine would work for kids, for instance. There are ways to design applications that will work for companies and to replace, say, what Slack is today for them. There are ways to design this using the same protocol without changing much, frankly. Ways to replace email itself. So if you, like going back to the original analogy, Nostr is just an information exchange protocol. If you can make a better email, it will be on Nostr right now. That is our only hope to get rid of these, super old formats that we have to deal with still. But Nostr is today, to your point in the Bitcoin community and how others think about it, Nostr today is the Discord for the Bitcoin community. Like what other communities use Discord for, and they have the silly metrics about how many users are on their Discord channel. That's the same thing. That's like Bitcoiners just recreated everything from scratch to have our own Discord and have our community right now, at least, engaged together in the same platform. And that's what's driving, frankly, most of this early development of the platform. Let's hope these other apps can come in and replace everything. I can see WhatsApp coming in. I can see Telegram. Well, I mean, Amethyst is already half of Telegram right there. So it doesn't take much to fully replace the feature set on each one of these applications into a Nostr-like system, while piggybacking on the entire network effect of the platform. And frankly, the fact that if you are a developer out there, you don't need to build servers. You just need to build, your little client app, and you're going to be happy about it. It's going to work because it's quite stable right now, and it's all about how many of those user-facing features you can provide, and how well the users see them.
Yeah. Do you think that today most Nostr users are Bitcoiners? Because I've heard a few different things. So I've heard of people saying there are activists joining Nostr because it's a censorship resistant platform. I've heard there was a big boost of people coming in from China. I think that might have been blocked off to some degree over the recent weeks. And actually, in the last couple of days, I've heard from people online. There was someone on one of my YouTube videos commented and said like, it's too bad Nostr's like, lumped in with this like Bitcoin trash. It was like, I'm like, what? Hold on, there's people on Nostr that are not Bitcoin fans. I thought everyone was, and this guy was like clearly not into Bitcoin. And I had seen another comment just yesterday that was, people wondering like who else is on Nostr outside of the Bitcoiners. Like it seems like now it has spread a little bit beyond Bitcoin. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, we're just starting. It definitely feels like a Bitcoin place still. I don't foresee that lasting very long. Hopefully, it doesn't last because, frankly, we don't want to be talking about Bitcoin all the time. It's like we want to have real lives, right? We want to have people that come in with their own little. If you want to place your photo of your barbecue in the weekend, so be it, right? If you want to have an app that connects to Ethereum and you have your own block of users that will use the Ethereum to pay instead of Lightning, so be it. I don't think the protocol cares. What people are seeing right now is that the community that is using is mostly Bitcoiners, because in the end they created the thing, so it's very easy to get people that you are aligned with around to use the tool. But frankly, this is not going to last. Hopefully, it doesn't last. Hopefully, we have more people coming in with more tools, different ideas, different payment systems, different coins. If it's shitcoin, let's all warn it's a shitcoin. But they are free to do it. They're free to develop. There is nothing in the protocol that will block them from doing so. Not even so. So one of the things that it's important to realize is that Nostr is not a consensus platform. Like we have the NIPs there that kind of defines the types of messages that people are working with most of the time, but it's more of a guidance if you really think about it. Because in the end, anybody can come in, create a new event type, and as long as the message has those elements, has an ID, has a public key, has some signed content, whatever that is, and has a content and has a signature for that content, relays will accept it, they will pass it forward. It doesn't matter to them what that information actually is. So hopefully that empowers everybody else to just come in and use the network in any way they see fit. And if they design something that is better than Bitcoin, I find hard to believe, but so be it. Try it. Let's see if it works. And let's grow together type of thing.
Right. I've seen some numbers that I'm not sure how accurate they are. There's Nostr.band that I believe does stats on the protocol, and one of the numbers they have there is a profiles with bio number. I think the last time I checked, that was about 600,000. Is that roughly is that a good estimate in your view of the number of humans on Nostr, or is that metric easy to game with bots? I think it does. It includes profiles with bios, so I imagine someone has to go through the process of at least adding a bio to their profile before they're counted in that metric. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how many people are on Nostr.
Yeah, this is a hard one because you can make a bot to create a new account and immediately post a new metadata event that has your bio in it, or it
Mm-hmm.
creates a bio from scratch. Yeah, no, use ChatGPT to generate a bio. So it's not really moving on. It might not be a really interesting metric. What you can do though is you can associate metrics together. You can get the amount of demos apps installs. You can get amount of Amethyst app installs. You can get this number, and you can kind of roughly get how much people are using the system. I think some of the online services, the online client apps, are also publishing some of their numbers in terms of how many people load pages and so on, which is already a slightly different metric, but it gives you an idea of how many people. Amethyst right now has 52,000 users, I believe. Demos should have around 100,000. And, so 600K is not that far off if you think about just two clients having that amount of people there. But that might not be an interesting metric. The most interesting metric is how much time do they spend in the platform to mimic some of the big tech failures there that, time is everything. But, if you have, if instead of using email, you're using Nostr to communicate with your company key workers, um, well, that's a good sign that the ecosystem is growing. If you're just using to browse social network and you only talk about Nostr and Bitcoin, I mean that's quite limiting as a scope of activity for something that could be much bigger than just this network. So the numbers can tell you many different stories, but you can always get like an upper bound to how much
Mm-hmm.
possible users that are out there. Don't forget there are also private relays. So those private relays might not be sending information to Nostr band, for instance, to make that into account. But I don't think that's a huge amount of services right now.
Yeah. So this is actually very similar to Lightning then, because
Right.
in Lightning, you also can't get a good grasp on numbers. You have to kind of like, whenever I look at stats on Lightning, I try and back into estimates based on pulling like 5 or 10 different metrics, combine them together and go, okay, what is a rough estimate here? And there's also private channels, like private
Right.
relays on Nostr, right? So there's some level of anonymity. There's some level of like, we're just never going to know everything that's happening on here. And you kind of have to make a best guess. Now,
And frankly, you never know if a person is a human or a bot.
right. Yeah.
So that's like on Lightning, there's at least you have to have a payment, so it's there's some money involved. So
Yeah.
it implies that there is some value being exchanged. But on Nostr, like everything is open and you can send messages, from a phone, from a computer. You can send a million messages in. You mentioned that Bitcoiners is the largest audience right now. I think the largest audience right now is spammers because the amount of messages is just crazy right now. So we're losing our grasp. But hopefully, more communities join to increase that.
Now, I want to talk about centralization because this is something. So we talked about email recently, and I want to use that analogy because SMTP is like an open protocol. There's multiple clients that can plug into it. And I can't remember where the blog post was, but I saw a blog post recently in the last 6 months or so from someone who was committed to like running his own email server, I think, and he was kind of trying to do it on his own, and he gave up after like 20 years. He was like, I gave up. I can't compete anymore. I can't even get some of my emails delivered. It's a game that is dominated by like Google and Apple Mail and some of these other big players. Is that something that can also happen on Nostr?
Yeah, that can also happen. Um, though the system was designed, the ideal system is user, relay, user. So there is no communication between relays, right? So email is a problem because right now the servers, there is no user-to-user communication. You have to go to a server first, and big tech will block the servers that they don't like, right? So, and since everything flows through them these days, they can essentially block the network. With Nostr, at least the way it was designed, and this can change and can change out of our control, is if you want to see a message from your friend, you have to share at least one relay in common today. That can change if relays start talking to each other by their own ways. You can start to create that centralizing effect that will be similar to email later on. But keep in mind, Nostr will always have this option that you can always connect to a new relay. And if you and your friend have a relay in common, you will be able to bypass the entire system. Even if that connection between relays gets really strong, you can always do there's always an option for you and a friend to talk. That doesn't exist on emails. That is just like if you two use the same email provider, maybe, but even in those situations, it's really tricky to actually see what's behind the scenes, and you don't really have any trust. Remember, email is not signed, so the email provider can actually create emails on your behalf. It can change your messages if you want. They can see everything, right? So it's about the users in the email world to trust that central player. With Nostr, that trust is not non-existent, but is way less for sure,
Hmm.
because the messages are signed, so you know if it's coming in, and you still trust your friend had that key safe, then you know it's real because the relay can't do anything about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, I want to talk about competition now. We kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, but competition and collaboration, there's a tension here, I think, and you know, there's teams that are working on similar things, there's teams that are working on different things, and it's very hard to get a good understanding of like who's on whose side, who's competing, who's collaborating. Maybe at the earliest stages, there's a lot more collaboration than competition. Everyone's kind of trying to grow the pie. But over time, I want to get your opinion on how the lines between competition and collaboration start to form.
So I go back to my point that in Nostr you do not have a consensus protocol. So in order for anybody to come in and do whatever they want, that there is no barriers. You can just come in and do it. Which means that if they start creating better applications that get momentum, that are different than the applications that I have today, that, for instance, are more decentralized than what they could come up with, they will win, right? They will take over the protocol because folks like myself on Amethyst, we can't just let those users out. We have to integrate with whatever they are doing and kind of bring them in and let people connect. Because after all, if users are deciding, you got to go with it. From a client developer standpoint, right? I'm sure others will disagree, but so the lines between competition and collaboration are extremely blurred on Nostr because you have to, if people are using a given message type, you have to support it. So there is some level of collaboration happening. It might not be a great collaboration. It might not be something like, a body of people coming together in a meeting somewhere and deciding the future of Nostr, which probably we don't want anyway, but it's not that type of collaboration for sure. And at the same time, there is a competition. So in the sense that if I'm forced to use your message type to talk to your users, I'm going to make sure I do it better than you do, right? Because then I can get your users on in our case in Amethyst instead of anything else. Um, so it does exist a level of competition and collaboration that is difficult to navigate because it's not a clear cut. You don't have this is not it's not like soccer clubs that you choose one and you go with it. No. You are constantly switching, you're constantly checking what other folks are doing, mostly because say Amethyst doesn't have a web UI, for instance. So if you are on a computer, you have to choose a different client. You have to experience something different. And that helps the decentralizing aspect of Nostr to keep alive. Um, if Amethyst had to do, a server, a client, an iOS app, then we can probably control more of that experience and don't let people leave. Um, but those apps will also always be there, and they will try to beat you up on the same levels of features, trying to provide better experiences to their users. So it's hard to say. I think it's going to be really hard for companies to navigate this ecosystem. For open source projects like us, we don't really care. It's like, we're doing this thing for free. It's out there. Anyone can fork it and create their own version. So almost by definition, competition is not on top of mind. The only competition we have is to just try to be the better client and have something to say on those lines to other folks, but that's it. And but when companies come in and they have a profit model around Nostr, then I think it will start to get really difficult for them if they are not innovating enough compared to people that will be trying to do the same things they are doing.
Right. Why take the approach of building out a client rather than a relay or some backup data storage product or some search product? Why is client where you guys are focusing?
Mostly because, like I said, I was an Android developer, so it was very easy for me to come in and then develop this. And I feel like that's the driving force for most other projects. Somebody at the team had experience with something and is trying to make an app that just is slightly different, in a slightly different way, connects with Nostr and provides a similar service they already are used to in some other part of their lives. And that is good. I think that is a great point in favor of Nostr as an ecosystem of applications, because it makes the development of those apps a lot faster, and it makes people like me, for instance, not want to go there. Because if there is let's say there is a data scientist that is trying to develop a new relay that is able to come up with an interesting ranking of users and in ways to give more power to some users, so it downloads that information faster or give some benefit to that ranking that they create. I'm not a data scientist, so I can't go there and just compete with that person, especially if that person makes something open source, right? So in that sense, Nostr is kind of perfect for decentralization, because we don't really want, like we were discussing before, Amethyst has the app right now and a server for view counts of the posts and a server for image resizing, right? So most of the profile pictures are 20 megabytes. That's a ridiculous amount of data that is being downloaded to every phone. We have to decrease that to 75 kilobytes or something. And so that the image server is there just doing that conversion for us. I don't want to build those servers. I don't want to keep them up there. So if somebody else is able to, with high degree of skill, to put the server up, do a better job than what we do, keep it stable, and open up for us to use, we would just use those servers, right? Because it doesn't make sense for me as an Android developer to pay attention to, if the servers are up or not. Like, servers is not a thing for me, right? So it's someone else's problem. Let them deal with it, especially if they're good with it. Then, so that is what excites most about Nostr in general, is that by definition, you have decentralizing incentives baked into the protocol. And if we can piggyback on those decentralizing incentives, then in the long run, we will not end up with the big tech infrastructure we have today or the government infrastructure we have today for any of these sub applications we were discussing.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Just a quick message from our sponsor, Stackwork. Stackwork is a lightning-powered platform for generating high-quality transcripts of all your audio or video content. They combine AI engines and hundreds of human workers all over the world who are paid over the Lightning Network to assemble these transcripts. And that's what lets Stackwork create better, faster, and less expensive transcripts. To see the results for yourself, you can check out my personal website where I host transcripts for all my podcast episodes. If you want to learn more about Stackwork, visit stackwork.com. That is STAK work.com. Yeah. And so your server for image resizing and for view count on post, that's all the data you have on your side. There's no you're not storing any of the posts or anything. That's the job of relays, right?
Correct. So you can choose to put a relay up if you're a client as well, but frankly, I don't have time for that. I prefer that relay operators put their relays up in any way they see fit, private and public, paying and open, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to try to make the best client to that relay I can, right? So if there are specific features they are trying to develop for their own services, come talk to us. We're going to develop additional features that will match those features you have. Mostly because again, we don't really know how to do servers. We know how to do apps. So why am I spending any time building servers? I would definitely prefer that somebody else could keep that, and hopefully in a way that gets that person up and going in a financial way as well. So they're just not just footing the bill for a server up. And for Amethyst, we don't have any data from our users but the two servers. So we don't know how many users. I mean, we know how many users are using just because the Play Store tells us to. But otherwise, there are no servers capturing your posts or seeing what you type or doing anything to collect analytics from the application itself. And I think that's probably a great pitch to have. And if we can make it even better, not having any servers, we would do.
Yeah.
I think we are very comfortable on not having any control over what our users do.
Right. Now, what is your biggest expense today? If you're not operating these servers, I'm curious to know more about what does it actually take to run Amethyst, and how are you funding it today?
So the servers themselves cost $300-400 a month or so. So this is not a big amount, but still some amount.
That's the Amethyst servers with just the image resizing.
The image resizing server, and the view count server.
Okay. What would it cost for a server if you're a relay to store all that data and pass that along?
Ooh, I guess it depends on how much data and how many clients you have, because it scales with the amount of use. So it could become very expensive. So we should all up there, if you are using Nostr, pay attention to relays. They're paying a significant amount just to keep your information there. So if you want to give them some Zaps and so on, please do. It's definitely important to keep things open, and so that people have always an option to use a public server as opposed to a private. If you can use private, go for it as well. With us, the biggest cost is for sure development time, right? So if you want to have a team of people that is full-time developing and maintaining the app as best as they can, then that will be the huge part of the cost of developing application. Right now, we're just open source, we're just having fun. But as this app grows, I'm pretty sure at some point, little bugs will not be acceptable anymore. And at that moment, then you're going to have a team to actually go through QA and make sure, when you design features, it makes sense for most users, that they don't crash, that they don't, especially if you integrate with payments and other sensitive information that you might want to deal with. Like when you get to those realms, you want to make sure you were the app is solid and there is no way to leak, or there is no way to break the experience for users.
Right. So at a time when you decide, hey, we need more resources, we need more developers, what do you think the right path forward is? Is it seek out VC funding? Is it charge users for a subscription and try and bootstrap it with revenue? Is it seek out grants and try and kind of, not get connected with VCs? What do you think the right approach might be?
Definitely, if we can avoid VCs, that's a preferred way. I have received VC funding before. I know how it works. I know how much control they have. I know what they're expecting from investing. Remember, if they invest 1 million, they want 10x back. So you got to find a profit margin that will pay 10 million back to them, plus paying all your regular operational costs. So we want to avoid as much as possible going to VCs. The model that has been interested us was this idea of trying to use the Zap feature to sustain a set of developers. So when we release a new version, for instance, even these days, we get a good amount of Zaps already replying to it. And if we can scale that up to a bigger audience, then you will end up getting enough resources to start hiring folks and keeping full-time people on payroll. That is not anywhere near we are right now. But if you can imagine that a social network will have the number of people required to keep the Zaps flowing and the company alive.
So these are just
And Frank,
Zaps going to you directly?
yeah. So
And
today, all Zaps go to me directly.
but don't you figure that over time, as an app scales, like for example, Twitter, how many of Twitter's users actually care about Twitter development? Like,
Right.
the earliest users maybe were all hardcore believers and followers and really interested in the app's development and success. But now it's like 99% of them they don't even care about Twitter engineering or anything, right?
Yeah, they will pay for specific features if you hit the nail that's exactly what they want. But otherwise, in any application, and this is very telling from an open source perspective. In any application, the growth of your revenue will come in from the top 1% of users. So those are the people, generally speaking, people develop apps for, and companies for. Like everybody else is just there for to follow on, but they're not really interested on having any additional cost from using those services. So when you see something like that, usually whatever entice that top 1% to donate is what they're going to be building. For Amethyst, I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible because we want to have just one class of users. So think about, it would be really easy to say, oh, you can have Amethyst, but you can only see 20 posts a day. And it's blocked by the application until you do a Zap. That creates two classes of users, and you end up only coding for the paying class, right? For Zaps, as of today, especially if it keeps growing, these are just donations with no expectation on paying for features, specific features that you might want from the app, which is probably the way to go if you can scale that enough. We don't know if you can scale, but we're gonna try. So if viewers are sending Zaps, keep them coming, because that's what sustains the development of the app. And if we get to a level where we can start have a team around it, we can either do a way to pay each one of the team members individually, so you always know where the money is going, right? So if a given team member is doing the features you want to see, you can just go straight to that person. But there is also a line where, say Amethyst creates a little company or a little foundation somewhere, and the foundation receives the money and then pays the team members, especially if you're not connected with the team. But again, like the top 1% that would pay is always really well connected with whoever is developing this, and they make their voices heard. They want certain features, so it's always about that balance that we need to strike. But right
Yeah.
now, we're doing this just for fun. So it's fully open, fully transparent. There is nothing behind the scenes going on because there's really not much going on anyway. It's just the app development, and everything is MIT licensed, which means anybody can fork the app at any point in time for private or non-profit purposes. It doesn't really matter. And that's where we want to keep it. Like we want to develop something that takes the base layer of user experience up over time, and that base layer must be free.
Right. Now, I want to talk about Nostr's architecture and how that changes the requirements for development. If we use the Twitter example, let's say I think Twitter has somewhere around 300 million users. There's maybe 3,000 employees that are serving those 300 million users. And if we were to now say, Amethyst is at 300 million users, would Amethyst also require the same resources that Twitter does? Would it be less because you don't have that server component? What changes about the ways in which you require resources as the company scales when you're operating on Nostr versus operating as a centralized platform?
So for apps, for client applications to the protocol, the beauty of all this is that you don't have a server. So you don't have continuing costs to sustain an architecture that you're probably not really good at sustaining anyway. So for applications like us, there is just no cost. The cost is the cost of breaking the app because you inserted a bug. That is the cost, right? Other than that, the code is up there. It right now, the way we have it, when I post a new version to GitHub, I just send a commit. It compiles everything. It sends automatically to the store, to the Play Store, and already enables everybody to download as soon as Google approves it. So not even the work of uploading exists anymore. Everything is automated, right? And that is kind of by design because as an open source project, you don't really have the revenues to do anything else. And as you scale, those things remain true. You do not have server costs. You do not have other things around it that will make you think through. For instance, Twitter has a huge pool of people to navigate reports, right? So to figure out if reports are true or false, and who is providing interesting information, who is not, what's real, what's not. For us, those would be services that the user will pay directly for, right? It's not part of the app. It's either baked into a relay, and that relay can be paid or free. If they can do free, would be awesome. Like with the power of the community to review reports, there is a chance you can make it free. But otherwise, it will be paid, and that's paying those folks to review everything would be where cost center for that relay is going to go, more than the servers themselves. But for apps, it's like that's the beauty of this. It's like if you really want to if you really care about users and application development, and you are the type of person that likes building good products that people like to use, likes to think about design, likes to think about how the product integrates people's lives and how to open up new ways of making them aware of each other. This is the dream for you because you can just do it. You can choose a server or can let users choose their servers. And if you require too much data, you let users pay for that relay's service directly. You don't need to get in between, and you become just this super awesome provider of a good experience. That if you want to charge for that experience, sure, but you do not want to deal with any of the other server side stuff that usually you do not have the skill for or the time for if you're building something, especially from an open source perspective.
Okay, so it's a much more capital light operation than it would be if you were building Twitter from scratch because of the servers and not having
Or any other Twitter equivalent. Think Slack, think Discord, think WhatsApp, think Instagram, think all of these platforms. They have a group of people internally that provide an iOS app, another one that provides an Android app, another one that provides a server-side architecture that works with these two apps. Then you have individual services that you can connect to those servers. the company is big just because they have to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't need to do it, think about like Elon Musk just paid $45 billion for Twitter. And what he bought is 2 apps, a couple servers, and a network effect that Twitter already has, meaning the creators on the platform and so on. If Elon says, you know what, we don't want to do UIs anymore, we're just going to control the servers, just make the servers Nostr compatible, and boom, you have both Deimos and Amethyst already connecting with the same network you had before. Now you do not have the cost to develop those applications anymore, right? And that might trigger some of the issues with your revenue model, but you have that option.
Okay, so let's talk about the revenue side. If you're more capital light as a client, are you also more revenue light? Is it harder to generate revenue, or can you command? Like I look around at centralized social platforms today, and I think Facebook at for North American users, I believe it's for US based users, they're generating over $100 per year from those users. I think it's about 150 last I checked. Twitter is much lower. I think it's more like 20, 25 for North American users. And they have different segments, and in different regions of the world, it may only be $8 or $12 or whatever. But that's not that much per. If you think it's $1 per month is $12 a year, and there's some segments of the world that's how much you'd be earning if you're running a Facebook or a Twitter or Pinterest or some other app like that. Can you compete and offer the services that give users or that make it so that users are willing to pay on Nostr? Can you generate as much revenue as you would as a centralized app, and thus make your profit margin wider because you don't have those expenses?
That's a good question, right? The first question to me is, do you need to generate the same revenue? Because remember, if you are a private player, you're not seeking just revenue, you're seeking profits. So if you can have the same level of profits, but with a smaller revenue, you would do at any time of the day. It's just a better company, right?
Right.
So there are a few questions for me there. One is that revenue is not coming from users, it's coming from ads, right? So the first question is there a chance to have an ad-based application on Nostr? And the answer is yes. You can just, like Amethyst for now, we could use ads to help pay for the development, for instance. The users of Amethyst would see ads, but not anybody else using Nostr, right? So though they do have the same information, so there will be some users walking away from our app if we decide to do so. But you can also think, well, maybe some of these users, the same users, are seeing the ads they actually want to see. And if that is the case, they would prefer to stay in an ad-based platform, right? So you can think through this as in two ways. You either enhance the way Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn perform their businesses by just serving better ads, and you become a better competitor because your ads are better. And frankly, if ads are really better and they really matter, then people will go for it. Or you can't do that anymore because your ads don't really matter. It's not really that exciting to see them anymore. And people just walk away from this model itself and start to look for other ways of having the same type of revenue, right? I think Twitter is going through that experiment right now of trying to figure out how to get rid of the advertisers or trying to keep them while also giving some power to users. It's a tricky business to be in, to be changing the business model like that. It's a lot easier to just create something new and say, you know what, our mindset is this. We're never going to put ads, like Amethyst will never put ads on our feed. So it's easy to go there. And as long as you keep that promise, likely you have your users. And if you break, they go away, especially because it's open source. For companies, if they are for companies, there are two things, right? For startups in this space. Now it's a lot easier to compete with Facebook and Twitter. So if you really want to make a better Facebook that is working the same way a Facebook works today, make an app, connect to Nostr, and because the simple fact that there is no ads in there, you might actually pass them. And if you find a way to do a better model where the user is paying for it, like Twitter is trying to do, either through verifiable check marks or some other way to add value to the information they are providing, you get a better result, right? The model that I think matters the most is some type of Substack-like interface where creators get paid for the content they make, not in any given platform, but for the protocol itself. So through Zaps that any app can actually integrate with. And if we can make that, if you have a company, if you have, say, a relay, and you can make a nice way for your creators to post content in a way that is way better than any other application, creators themselves will pay for that interface, right? So you are now switching the model around and say, you know what? Creators are making money because they get the Zaps. Part of that resource can be used to pay for their own tooling, like you pay for a microphone and cameras and so on. It's just part of doing business. And that does have a model today. But of course, it's bound by all the other Nostr applications to, in this case, integrate with Zaps and make sure, when payments are available, that they can be made.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I wanna end it off with something I do at the end of every show. It's called the lightning round, and I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Nice.
First one: has there been any book that has meaningfully changed your view of the world?
Books. I think the most important one was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I read when I was like 12 or so, and that made me think critically about everything I knew about the universe back then. It's just a science fiction book, right? Super simple, super fast to read, but the amount of questions that book raises is enough to trigger the curiosity on everything else you do in life. So for me, at least on my career, that is what triggered the desire to learn computer science, the desire to go through a PhD and get a higher level of knowledge there, to create and build things. And all the other books are kind of like an extension to those simple ideas, those points of criticism and points of why you're not thinking that a towel is the most powerful weapon in the universe, right? It's why not? So when you start making those questions of why not, is when you're building something that maybe other folks have not realized yet.
It's interesting. Great recommendation. Next question is: how many people will be using Nostr in 5 years?
Hopefully over 10 million people.
Over 10 million people. I like it. And right now we figure there's low hundreds of thousands, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And hopefully with a very diverse community set, right? So we don't want just Bitcoiners. We don't want just people that today most of my feed is just talking about Nostr itself. I'm like, sure, that is exciting right now, but moving forward, we want people to have all types of opinions in the platform,
Right.
especially if it's a social network application. Let's hope the work I'm doing for medical information also gets there. The work other folks are doing for other types of applications also get there, so we can have just a better ecosystem. And frankly, the end goal for me is to replace email. If we can find a way to shut off SMTP servers, we won.
Yeah, that's a lofty goal. I like it. If you could change one thing about Nostr, what would you change?
If we could change one thing, potentially the way people understand account management more than the protocol itself. The way I just described, which is this: every time you have a new user in the platform, they think their public and private key are kind of for life, right? And that's just not the case. That apps like Amethyst will have to deal with migrating of keys. So that is an issue at the core of the protocol as well as an issue for an user interface design perspective of making sure people understand that one, they can actually migrate away if the key leaks. The two, that they can actually decide to erase their posts and create what they can do. For instance, they can create fake information about themselves to disqualify everything they already said, right? So because anyone downloading the new information today wouldn't know if that's you or that's a fake of you, almost as if the account has been leaked. So you can create that user interface to help simply empower that user to know that it's not as much of a monster as it is today, that whatever you post is linked to you forever and you can't really undo it, which is true because you sign the message and you send it out there, but it's also not true because your identity is not traditionally linked to that private key anymore. You can't change. Sorry, I guess this is not much of a lightning answer.
That's fair. Uh, if you could only hold one asset for the next decade and it could not be Bitcoin, what asset would it be?
My own company.
Fair
Because
enough.
that's the thing that people don't realize. The shitcoins are also your own companies, and they go up and down as you put effort into them. So
Yeah.
it's something at least you control, as opposed to a coin that you might not control. But it's all of us Bitcoiners, we do have a second asset that we always have around somehow.
Yeah. You can always bet on yourself.
Right.
Final question. Who is one person in the Nostr or Lightning or Bitcoin ecosystem that you want to give a shout out to for doing great work?
Antonopoulos, for sure. Like a great educator, got me into Bitcoin in the very early days. I think he's the one who has probably still the best books for a technical person, and I hope he comes back and does a new book on either a new version of a Lightning or a Bitcoin type of book, or something on Nostr itself. Who knows?
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can listeners go to learn more about you and Amethyst?
So it's amethyst.social is our main website, which is just a link to it right now. But if you want to hit a link there, then do you want to do npubs? I don't know.
Sure.
Like I can send you my npub, and because I want try to discourage people from going to Twitter.
Fair
Right,
enough.
because it doesn't make any sense if if I'm developing an alternative platform, why would they give me my address there?
I'll put that in the description. Thank you so much for taking the time.
This
Hope we
is
can do it
great.
again soon.
Conversation was awesome.
All right. In the last 7 days, you guys sent in 13,540 sats. That came in from 18 different supporters. Massive shout out to everyone who's been contributing to the show. We got a bunch of comments in this week. First up, we have Andy Flattery, who sent 500 sats and says, Morgan Rochard, always a class act and a unicorn in financial planning. That was in response to episode 94 with Morgan Rochard. Thank you, Andy. Robodog sent 100 sats and said, my first boost. Wow, that's impressive. Thank you, Robodog, for letting my show be your first boost. This is in response to episode 97 that Robodog sent their boost. Blockchain Boog sent in 500 sats and said, wow, first time I'm hearing of this company, February 2023. The company is Liquid, and the episode he's responding to is episode 5 with Sean Anstey, CEO at Liquid. And this is a public company that is building on the Lightning Network. Blockchain Boog also sent in a few more comments on Liquid. He said on December 6th, 2021, when the episode was released, the share price was $3.16 US dollars, and today it is 61 cents. I think there was a share split at some point. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but not financial advice. Blockchain Boog sent a few more comments, said, thanks for bringing light to this company, Kevin. I'm buying some shares. Again, not financial advice. proud owner of the company is building the future. I want to see with Bitcoin as a focus. Bring these guys back for an update, Kevin. Thank you, Blockchain Book, for the sats in the comments. Very interesting project at Liquid. I'll definitely keep in touch with them and see if they can come back for another episode. Armstress sent 1,000 sats and said, really interesting conversation. I hope more people look to the successes and failures of decentralized funding attempts in the Gitcoin ecosystem. I think people generally avoid talking or looking at it because it isn't Bitcoin, but it would be silly not to learn from their mistakes and implement successful strategies for project-based funding and grant matching. Very excited for potential future in this area enabled by Nostr and Lightning. I agree. It's worth learning from the successes and failures of other projects. I know the Gitcoin guys, a couple of them at least, and yeah, I think that's an important thing to look at. Thank you for the comment and the sats, Armstress. Ion497 boosted 5,000 sats and said, probably one of my favorite episodes to date. Drew's take on Bitcoin scaling and the economics necessary to build truly decentralized systems were very insightful. Thank you for the kind words and for the 5,000 sats. And Max Webster boosted 10,000 sats on episode 97 with David King and said, great episode, guys. Thank you, Max. That means a lot coming from you. We gave a shout out to Max's blog post in the episode. If you've not checked out episode 97 yet, definitely give it a listen after this one. And I can't wait to see what you guys send in this week.